students will be also helped by the presence of DIA student bodies, who will be helping them to adapt while studying at UPI and living in Bandung. Therefore, international students will have no difficulty adopting here. There are many programs that have been held by DIA UPI. For scholars, there are international faculty programs and visiting scholars, which connect foreign lecturers and UPI academic community. For international students, there are various programs that you can be involved in and be a part of UPI's community. There are C-Teacher, dan Mahasiswa Republik Indonesia Scholarship Program, KNB Scholarship Program, Summer Program, International Student Bodies Virtual Summit, International Culinary Days, and many more. And don't worry, for UPI students, we also have special programs for you. If you want to study abroad or study culture-related course, student exchange is the answer. We have PPL Sekolah Indonesia Luar Negeri, student internship, summer program, and international culinary days. So, what are you waiting for? Just follow our social media on Instagram at dia.upi, visit our website at www.dia.upi.edu, and contact us through email dia@upi.edu to find more information. We are waiting for your participation in our programs.
This is Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia. Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia was initially established in 20th of October 1954 in Bandung City as Teachers Education College. The institution was integrated as a part of Pajajaran University, then amended into Institute of Teacher Education and Educational Sciences, or IKIP, and finally re-established as Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia, or UPI. The Bumi Siliwangi building, formerly known as Villa Isola, is the university's main building as well as its icon. Villa Isola, an Art Deco building that currently serves as the Rectorate building, is now inaugurated as one of the nation's cultural heritage buildings. UPI's primary mission is to become a leading and outstanding university. Thereby, UPI is committed to promote academic excellence and nurture innovation and scholarly development in order to be a leading pioneer in the field of education. By having scientific, educative, and religious as its motto, UPI strives to balance the three concepts, all in one harmony. Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia is made up of 8 faculties: Faculty of Educational Sciences, Faculty of Social Science Education, Faculty of Language and Literature Education, Faculty of Mathematics and Science Education, Faculty of Technology and Vocational Education, Faculty of Sports and Health Science Education, Faculty of Economics and Business Education, Faculty of Art and Design Education, and UPI also offers postgraduate programs at the School of Postgraduate, including various research opportunities and civic services at the Center of Research and Community Services. Additionally, UPI also offers non-educational courses as a mandate extension of the government to nurture future graduates of non-educational programs. UPI, in its academic implementation, is committed to apply cross-fertilization approach between educational and non-educational programs to mutually strengthen both of the areas. A part of the main campus in Bandung, UPI is strengthened by 6 branch campuses, which located in several locations. UPI Bumi Siliwangi, UPI Cibiru, UPI Tasikmalaya, UPI Purwakarta, UPI Sumedang, and UPI Serang. In fostering student activities, UPI optimizes the empowerment of Student Activity Unit, namely UKM, or Unit Kegiatan Mahasiswa, and the engagement of students in various activities related to their talents, interests, and intellectual. Thus, it is not surprising if UPI students got so many achievements at the national and international level. As the center of the science and education practices development, UPI also has a laboratory schools range from early childhood education to high school level located at the main campus and the branch campuses. In supporting the national education preservation and fostering a brighter future of education, UPI built the Museum of National Education, expected to be sources of learning, research, educative, leisure for the public, particularly for students on all levels. From the dazzling land of Bumi Siliwangi, welcome to Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia, the leading and outstanding university.
Welcome to Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia.
Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia is located in Bandung, West Java. Living in Bandung means students and scholars will experience vibrant, warm, and progressive city environment. Bandung offers high-quality environment for students and scholars' living standards, starting from academic support facilities, natural and man-made recreational facilities, achievable transportations, and ample green open spaces. In Indonesia, Bandung is popular for its nickname, Kota Kembang or the City of Flower. Since decades ago, Bandung has always been known for its lovely weather because of the trees along the way, and known to be a beautiful city because of its famous ornamental flower varieties. Then, how to get more information regarding studying at UPI or joining UPI international events? Here at UPI's Directorate of International Affairs will be pleasure to assist you. Directorate of International Affairs, which was formerly known as the Office of International Education and Relation, is an office at Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia whom handles all international relations. DIA aims to support the internationalization goals of the university and to manage international mobility involving local and international students, faculty members, and other academics relations. As a university with a jargon leading and outstanding, UPI has actively collaborated with many universities from all over the world, such as Philippines, Japan, Malaysia, Afghanistan, Germany, United Kingdom, Taiwan, South Korea, Uzbekistan, Finland, Canada, and many more. With experiences in working with various countries around the world, DIA will assist and serve all international students and prospective students without any differences. International students will be also helped by the presence of DIA student buddies, who will be helping them to adapt while studying at UPI and living in Bandung. Therefore, international students will have no difficulty adopting here. There are many programs that have been held by DIA UPI. For scholars, there are international faculty programs and visiting scholars, which connect foreign lecturers and UPI academic community. For international students, there are various programs that you can be involved in and be a part of UPI's community. There are C-Teacher, Mahasiswa Republik Indonesia Scholarship Program, KNB Scholarship Program, Summer Program, International Student Bodies Virtual Summit, International Culinary Days, and many more. And don't worry, for UPI students, we also have special programs for you. If you want to study abroad or study culture-related course, student exchange is the answer. We have PPL Sekolah Indonesia Luar Negeri, student internship, summer program, and international culinary days. So, So, what are you waiting for? Just follow our social media on Instagram at dia.upi, visit our website at www.dia.upi.edu and contact us through email dia@upi.edu to find more information. We are waiting for your participation in our programs.
This is Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia. Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia was initially established in 20th of October 1954 in Bandung City as Teachers Education College. The institution was integrated as a part of Pajajaran University, then amended into Institute of Teacher Education and Educational Sciences, or IKIP, and finally re-established as Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia, or UPI. The Bumi Siliwangi building, formerly known as Villa Isola, is the university's main building as well as its icon. Villa Isola, an Art Deco building that currently serves as the Rectorate building, is now inaugurated as one of the nation's cultural heritage buildings. UPI's primary mission is to become a leading and outstanding university. Thereby, UPI is committed to promote academic excellence and nurture innovation and scholarly development in order to be a leading pioneer in the field of education. By having scientific, educative, and religious as its motto, UPI strives to balance the three concepts, all in one harmony. Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia is made up of 8 faculties. Faculty of Educational Sciences, Faculty of Social Science Education, Faculty of Language and Literature Education, Faculty of Mathematics and Science Education, Faculty of Technology and Vocational Education, Faculty of Sports and Health Science Education, Faculty of Economics and Business Education, Faculty of Art and Design Education, and UPI also offers postgraduate programs at the School of Postgraduate, including various research opportunities and civic services at the Center of Research and Community Services. Additionally, UPI also offers non-educational courses as a mandate extension of the government to nurture future graduates of non-educational programs. UPI, in its academic implementation, is committed to apply cross-fertilization approach between educational and non-educational programs to mutually strengthen both of the areas. A part of the main campus in Bandung, UPI is strengthened by 6 branch campuses, which located in several locations. UPI Bumi Siliwangi, UPI Cibiru, UPI Tasikmalaya, UPI Purwakarta, UPI Sumedang, and UPI Serang. In fostering student activities, UPI optimizes the empowerment of Student Activity Unit, namely UKM or Unit Kegiatan Mahasiswa, and the engagement of students in various activities related to their talents, interests, and intellectual. Thus, it is not surprising if UPI students got so many achievements at the national and international level. As the center of the science and education practices development, UPI also has a laboratory schools ranged from early childhood education to high school level located at the main campus and the branch campuses. In supporting the national education preservation and fostering a brighter future of education, UPI built the Museum of National Education, expected to be sources of learning, research, educative, leisure for the public, particularly for students on all levels. From the dazzling land of Bumi Siliwangi, welcome to Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia, the leading and outstanding university.
Welcome to Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia.
Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia is located in Bandung, West Java. Living in Bandung means students and scholars will experience vibrant, warm, and progressive city environment. Bandung offers high-quality environment for students and scholars' living standards, starting from academic support facilities, natural and man-made recreational facilities, achievable transportations, and ample green open spaces. In Indonesia, Bandung is popular for its nickname, Kota Kembang or the City of Flower. Since decades ago, Bandung has always been known for its lovely weather because of the trees along the way, and known to be a beautiful city because of its famous ornamental flower varieties. Then, how to get more information regarding studying at UP or joining UP international events? Here at UP's Directorate of International Affairs will be pleasure to assist you. Directorate of International Affairs, which was formerly known as the Office of International Education and Relation, is an office at Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia whom handles all international relations. DIA aims to support the internationalization goals of the university and to manage international mobility involving local and international students, faculty members, and other academic relations. As a university with a jargon leading and outstanding, UPI has actively collaborated with many universities from all over the world, such as Philippines, Japan, Malaysia, Afghanistan, Germany, United Kingdom, Taiwan, South Korea, Uzbekistan, Finland, Canada, and many more. With experiences in working with various countries around the world, DIA will assist and serve all international students and prospective students without any differences. International students will be also helped by the presence of DIA student buddies, who will be helping them to adapt while studying at UPI and living in Bandung. Therefore, international students will have no difficulty adapting here. There are many programs that have been held by DIA UPI. For scholars, there are international faculty programs and visiting scholars, which connect foreign lecturers and UPI academic community. For international students, there are various programs that you can be involved in and be a part of UPI's community. There are C-Teacher, dan Mahasiswa Republik Indonesia Scholarship Program, KNB Scholarship Program, Summer Program, International Student Bodies Virtual Summit, International Culinary Days, and many more. And don't worry, for UPI students, we also have special programs for you. If you want to study abroad or study culture-related course, student exchange is the answer. We have PPL Sekolah Indonesia Luar Negeri, student internship, summer program, and international culinary days. So, what are you waiting for? Just follow our social media on Instagram at dia.upi, visit our website at www.dia.upi.edu, and contact us through email dia@upi.edu to find more information. We are waiting for your participation in our programs. Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia is located in Bandung, West Java. Living in Bandung means students and scholars will experience vibrant, warm, and progressive city environment.
Check.
Bandung offers high-quality environment for students and scholars' living standards, starting from academic support facilities, natural and man-made recreational facilities, achievable transportations, and ample green open spaces.
Ladies and gentlemen, my apologies for the technical glitch. Now allow me to start over. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. a very good morning from Bandung, Indonesia, and also a very good afternoon and a very good evening to those of you in different sides of the world. My name is Chapubad Abdullah, and I'm delighted to be hosting today's agenda. The Honorable Rector of Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia, Professor M. Solehuddin, the Honorable Vice Rector for Education and Student Affairs, Professor Didi Sukyadi, the Honorable Vice Rector for Finance and Human Resources, Professor Agus Rahayu, the Honorable Vice Rector for Planning, Organization and Information System, Professor Bunyamin Maftu, the Honorable Vice Rector for Research, International Affairs, Partnership and Business, Professor Adang Suherman, the Honorable Speaker for today's webinar, Kurt Schickman, Director for Extreme Heat at Adrian Arts Rockefeller Foundation Resilience Center at the Atlantic Council, Washington, D.C., USA. Thank you so much for coming. It is such an honor for us to have you here, sir. The Honorable Deans, Vice Deans, Heads of Departments, Heads of Study Programs, Directors of Directorates, Directors of Regional Campuses, Researchers, Lecturers, and also students of Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia, the honorable audience, either on Zoom link or on the live streaming of YouTube, TV UP channel, the Honorable Professor Ravi Srinivasan from the University of Florida, the USA, and the Honorable Bipin Shah from Winbuilt Inc., USA, and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Warmest greetings and welcome to the third International Distinguished Scholar Webinar Series, World Class University, Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia. This webinar is the third out of 7 webinar series, hosted and organized by the Directorate of International Affairs, Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia, as a part of commemoration of UPI's 67th anniversary, or DS Natalis. Today's topic of discussion will be about the global opportunity of addressing rising temperature, delivered by Mr. Kurt Schickman, the Director for Extreme Heat at Adrian Arts Rockefeller Foundation Resilience Center at the Atlantic Council, Washington, D.C. Ladies and gentlemen, to begin with, I would like to invite the Director of Directorate of International Affairs, Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia, Bapak Ahmad Bukhari Muslim, PhD, to deliver his report. Bapak Ahmad Bukhari, please.
Thank you, MC Paubad. Very good morning, early morning to the people in Africa. Good morning to people in Indonesia and other Southeast Asian countries such as Malaysia, Philippines, Vietnam, and also Pakistan. And I think it's good evening to people in the United States and South America, such as here, I see here participant from Argentina. Honorable Professor Adang Suherman, the Vice Director for Research, International Partnership and Business, Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia. Honorable esteemed speaker, Mr. Kurt Schickman, the Director of Adrian Arts Rockefeller Foundation Resilience, Washington, D.C. Dear all esteemed audience from Indonesia and overseas countries. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. It's with great pleasure to welcome you all virtually to the International Distinguished Scholar Webinar Series 3. This webinar series is organized by Directorate of International Affairs in commemoration with UPI's 67th anniversary or Dies Natalis, Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia. Please be informed that we have 7 webinar series altogether until the end of November 2021. The topic of this webinar series is the global opportunity of addressing rising temperatures, to be delivered by Mr. Kurt Schickman, the Director of Adrian Arts Rockefeller Foundation Resilience, Washington, D.C., United States of America. Ladies and gentlemen, the issue of rising temperature has become a global concern of all people on the earth. In the recent decades, for example, we have witnessed how governments in the world have met nearly every year to forge a global response to the climate emergency. The fourth largest population in the world, for instance, Indonesia, also has a serious challenge in facing this rising temperature. The country has about 62 inhabitants living in urban area, living only 38% in rural area, and this making a constant rise in temperature. Considering this importance, it's no wonder if this webinar has received a significant reception from audience of scholars, researchers, lecturers, and students in Indonesia and overseas. At the moment, we have received about 500 registration of participants coming from Indonesia and overseas countries such as Malaysia, Philippines, Pakistan, Argentina, United States, Vietnam, New Zealand, and Rwanda. Since this rising temperature is a global issue, it is indeed that we need to learn how to hold and even reduce the rising temperature for a more sustainable life on Earth, not only for us, but also for our future offsprings. Finally, I would like to invite the Vice Rector for Research, International Partnership and Business to officially open the webinar. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish you a fruitful and insightful webinar. Thank you and Assalamualaikum.
Thank you very much, Pak Ahmad Bukhari Muslim, the Director of DIA UPI, for the report. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to call upon Rector of Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia, who in this occasion is represented by the Vice Rector for Research, International Affairs, Business and Partnership, Professor Dr. Adang Suherman, MA, to deliver his welcoming speech as well as to officially open today's webinar. Professor Adang, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Pak Ubad. Can you hear me? Okay. Honorable speakers, Mr. Kurt Stickman, Director of Andrian Art, Rockefeller Foundation Resilience, Washington, D.C., USA. Dear all ladies and gentlemen from Indonesia and overseas countries, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I feel honored to say a few words as the opening of this international webinar series. As you may have been informed, this webinar series is organized by Director of International Affairs as part of 67 UPI anniversary or Dies Natalis. Ladies and gentlemen, for almost 3 decades, world government have met nearly every year to create a global response to the climate emergency. Under the 1992 United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, every country on Earth is treaty bound to avoid dangerous climate change and find ways to reduce greenhouse gas emission globally in an equitable way. There are 3 counterparts that play a significant roles in climate resilience. First, enabling resilience at scale. Second, place-based initiative. And third, individual resilience. Of these 3 roles, as individual, we can at least focus on individual resilience. Ladies and gentlemen, Indonesia, as the fourth largest population in the world, has a serious challenge in facing this rising temperature. The country has about 62% inhabitant living in urban area, living only 38% in rural area. The vulnerability of urban areas facing climate change is higher compared with the rural areas due to the massive activity of industry, transportation, and building density. Thus, incriminating its microclimate than in the rural area. The topics today, the global opportunity of addressing rising temperatures, will be relevant to anticipate the condition above. In this webinar, Kurt Sigmund is going to give us a perspective and different point of view on how to deal with rapid change in urban area and what opportunities are available in addressing the rising temperature. As requested by organizing committee, I would now officially declare this webinar open by saying Basmalah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I wish you a fruitful and insightful webinar. Thank you very much and Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you so much, Professor Adang Suherman, Vice Rector for Research, International Affairs, Partnership and Business, Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia, for a warming, welcoming speech, as well as for officially opening today's agenda. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, now that today's webinar has just been officially opened, it's time for us to listen to the talk on the global opportunity of rising temperatures by Mr. Kurt Sigmund. However, prior to that, allow me to announce that question and answer session will be generated through slido.com. So you can drop your questions there on slido.com and use the hashtag top webinar 2, which is case sensitive. So you have to pay attention to the capital letters. And later, the committee will select the most requested questions to be addressed to the speaker. So ladies and gentlemen, this session will be chaired by our beloved colleague, Ibu Beta Paramita. So allow me to briefly read her CV. So ladies and gentlemen, Beta Paramita is an assistant professor at Architecture Department in Indonesia University of Education. She finished her bachelor degree in architecture study program in 2000, and she held Master of Architecture in Urban Design of Tropical City. In 2014, she finished her doctorate in the University of Kitakyushu, Japan, and her interest of research includes sustainable city and green building, especially on building performance and outdoor thermal comfort. Currently, she is the chair of Indonesia Built Environment Research Association, IPLBI, and board member of IBPSAID, that is the International Building Performance Simulation Association, Indonesia chapter. Besides, she is also active in RDI, Research Resilience Initiative, that focuses on community, environmental change, and sustainable development. She is also in charge for UPI Green Metric World University Rankings for Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia, and she is also a member of editorial board of Malaysian Journal of Sustainable Environment. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please join me in giving the warmest and nicest welcome to Ibu Beta Paramita.
Thank you, Pak Ubat. Terima kasih. Good morning to those of you in Indonesia and in the neighboring countries. Good evening to those on the other side of the globe. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'd like to welcome you all to the third event of the International Distinguished Scholar Webinar Series hosted by Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia, UPI. I'm Beta Paramita. It is my honor to be here in the next 2 hours will lead this session. We are grateful to the Rector of UPI who has invited Kurt Sigman, the Director of Heat Extreme Initiative at the Adressing Rockefeller Foundation Resilience Center at the Atlantic Council. This webinar in line with the world effort on limiting the global temperature rise, where the world is heading for 2.4 Celsius of warming, far more than the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit nation committed to. Achieving low carbon in 2030 seems really challenging since the greenhouse gas emission that warm the planet still be twice as high as necessary. This webinar also in the same direction with the recent important meeting UN COP26, UN Climate Change Conference, where the parties are expected to commit to enhance ambition toward mitigating climate change. We are lucky enough to have Kurt Sigman here to listen to his enormous experience as Director of Extreme Heat Initiative at the Adressing Rockefeller Foundation Resilience Center. Kurt Sigman is leading and expanding the center's work to tackle the global challenge that heat presents our community with financial solution, public engagement through technology, policy development, and the on-the-ground implementation. Kurt comes to the center from the Global Cool City Alliance, where he was an executive director and is the former director of research for the energy and climate team at the United Nations Foundation. Kurt launched the Global Cool City Alliance in 2011 and built it into a global network of over 70 cities focused on implementing passive cooling solutions to combat rising urban heat. He has lead projects for the World Bank, the U.S. Department of Energy, Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, and the Clean Energy Ministerial. Kurt helped develop the Million Cool Roof Challenge, which established local champions, market, policy, and awareness for passive cooling solutions in 10 countries facing an acute lack of access to cooling. Between 2019 and 2021, those teams deployed over 1.1 million square meters of cool roof and laid the foundation for future growth of passive cooling. He's the lead author of Prime for Cool Cities, Reducing Excessive Urban Heat, a publication of the Energy Sector Management Program and the Global Platform for Sustainable City Practices at the World Bank. In his prior role at the United Nations Foundation, Kurt focused on U.S. federal policy to promote energy-efficient buildings and expedited electrical transmission development for renewable energy. He holds a Master of Art from the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies and a Bachelor of Art from Wake Forest University. So, to put your curiosity at ease regarding his talk about the global opportunity of addressing rising temperature, let's join me in welcoming Kurt Sigman.
Thank you so much, Professor Paramita. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Okay, are you able to see that okay, hopefully? Wonderful, okay. Well, first of all, I'm honored to be invited to join this webinar series, and I want to thank the Honorable Rector of UPI, Professor Dr. Solahuddin, the Honorable Vice Rectors, who we've heard from today, the Board of Trustees, the Board of Professorship, the Director of the Directorate of cover some of what the center does in the talk itself, but you can get a sense of the general idea of our approach, or our sort of theory of change is in the three circles here. And the first is, and it's really focused around what we see as the main barriers to the obvious and clear need to act to reduce extreme heat. And the first is to help establish the enabling environment for cooling off our cities and our communities. Things like insurance, changes to insurance and the reinsurance markets, changes to the way we finance, and to increase the amount of financing that's available from a variety of sources to invest in these important technologies and strategies. A focus on place-based initiatives. There's still a need to demonstrate and grow the champions for action in various places, and to demonstrate in one or two locations what can be done at scale. And then finally, remembering that we're all, and I believe the Honorable Vice Director made this point very well earlier, that we're all individuals that become parts of communities, that become parts of our states, our nations, and so on. And so there's a need to focus also on the individual resilience and how these measures translate to our individual lives as well. And just a quick introduction to the Global Cool Cities Alliance. So prior to 2 weeks ago, I was the executive director of the Global Cool Cities Alliance, which launched out of the Lawrence Berkeley National Labs Heat Island Group just over 10 years ago, with a mission to work with cities and communities to promote passive cooling measures, with a primary focus on solar reflective surfaces, which I'll talk about: cool roofs, cool walls, and cool roads. We've done work with a number of national and international agencies in this space, and we co-lead a network of 55 cities with the C40 Climate Leadership Group, and then a separate network of 27 U.S. cities that are focused specifically on accelerating awareness in the market for cool pavements as a critical urban cooling solution. As Bita mentioned, we're also part of the Million Cool Roofs Challenge, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on, because I think that's a key piece of how we will move to scale with passive cooling measures. But the idea here was to work with communities where there's a real need for a focus on a wide variety of cooling services to meet the challenge of rising temperatures in those communities. You can see here on the screen that the yellow squares are the countries in which we were working, and the idea was to help support financially and with some technical support where needed the development of marketplaces and policies, and really most importantly, capable champions of passive cooling that can take and help get to scale these measures in their local context and with local stakeholders. So I'm going to move on to the global challenge here, what I call the bad news section here, and I want to sort of frame this in three major global trends that are driving the big piece of the challenge that we were facing with rising temperatures and extreme temperatures. And the first is on the left-hand piece of this box, and that is the well-known fact that we're migrating to cities. We're urbanizing at a rapid rate. We'll be moving from about 1 in 2 people living in cities to about 2 in 3 people over the next 30 years. And 80% of that change is going to occur in South Asia and in Africa. So it's not a global trend. It's really a focused trend in particular regions. And the second trend is the well-known trend that globally, on an average basis, we're heating up, and we're heating up rapidly. We've already experienced over a degree of warming since the beginning of the industrial age, and we're on track for substantially more than that. And certainly the Council of Parties meeting right now in Glasgow is helping us understand and highlight just how much more warming we'll be expecting. And when we look at cities themselves are actually heating up at twice the rate of the global average. And so if we take these together, what we're basically saying is we're moving more and more people into hotter and hotter spaces that will continue to warm at an even more rapid rate. And in many contexts, this move to cities is happening into informal areas and informal settlements where they complicate the solution sets that are available to us. And this lack of access to cooling, and by lack of access to cooling, I mean sort of two things here. First, there are those that are economically able to purchase an air conditioner and run an active air conditioning unit, something that takes electrical power to operate. And in that category of access, we face one particular challenge, and that is powering those units going forward. You can see here, this is the projection for the global air conditioning stock that was developed by the International Energy Agency in their future of cooling report. And to meet the demand, if we were to actually install this many air conditioners over the next 30 years, we would actually need to build the electrical generation capacity that we currently have in the US, Europe, and India combined. So we're talking about a multi-trillion-dollar set of investments to simply meet the expected demand for air conditioning units that we have currently. And that's if you're lucky enough to have the economic capacity to buy and maintain and operate that air conditioning. On the other side of the equation, we have those that are not economically or don't have access to stable electrical power to operate active cooling systems. And here we're talking about over 1.1 billion people who don't have access to those solutions, and will need to have some other sets of solutions available to them to survive and thrive where they live. And for that, we mean most likely passive cooling solutions. So it's a huge global problem, and it's also a dire one from a couple different avenues here. And so I'm going to talk through a few of these particular challenges that he generates. But I want to make the general point that if you think about an urban system or a community system or a human system, there aren't many systems that we deal with in a regular basis in our economic system, in our agricultural processes, and so on, that heat isn't having that rising temperatures and extreme heat are having a negative impact on. So I'm going to focus on a few, but please keep in mind that this is about as broad a spectrum of a challenge as we face in the global context today. So I'm going to start with the sort of economic piece of this, and this is from on the left side here. This is from a report that was done in the journal Nature Climate Change, or published in the journal Nature Climate Change back in 2017. And you can see the title there. And it was a really comprehensive review of close to 2,000 cities around the world. And what they looked at was the cost of unchecked urban temperatures and local climate change impacts. So essentially, what is the cost to not doing anything on heat? And what they found was that by 2050, the median city in their study would face about just under 2% GDP. It would cost them 2% of their GDP annually to deal with the lack of action on those challenges. And that could be everything from the health system to infrastructure, the whole range. They valued that at around 2% of their GDP lost due to inaction. And by 2100, the median city was losing up to 5.6%, or almost 6%. So think of that as a 6% tax on not doing anything. And when we consider the size of GDP of many of the major cities where this work needs to be done, this is a tremendous economic loss that could be avoided. On the other side of the page here, on the right side, we also see that this inaction will potentially be a devastating one in terms of human health and mortality. And I'm focusing here on the most dire piece of it, which is death here. And what we see from the World Health Organization's report is that changes in heat and poor air quality resulting from rising temperatures will kill upwards of 250,000 people annually by 2050, and just under 100,000 annually by 2030. Now, these are largely avoidable deaths. So just to frame sort of the top line of this, I also want to talk about air quality, since that's a big piece of the health component here. So heat is if we think about how air quality is impacted by heat, it sort of hits in two different ways. The first is higher temperatures increase demand for active cooling air conditioners, and other sorts of space cooling measures, which in turn increases electricity demand. So depending on the mix of electrical generation, this will increase the emissions of ground level ozone, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide, carbon monoxide, and a variety of fine particulate matter and other pollutants. And to the extent that those generation facilities are closer to cities, those impacts will be worse. And this effect on air quality is most pronounced in cities where that power generation is close to them. Heat also helps activate some of these precursor chemicals in the atmosphere. So you see more smog being formed and more ozone being formed on hot days than you do on cool ones. The other aspect of this is urban design that blocks wind. So one of the key factors that's driving urban heat islands or elevated temperatures in cities is the fact that we are blocking wind with our human development. We build tall buildings that block the wind. Therefore, we slow down the wind within the urban core, and that makes it harder to move the air out of the urban core and into areas of lower concentrated population. And so these two factors together, which are, one is in a direct relation to heat, one is one of the factors that causes urban heat, are two major reasons why we see air quality being reduced as a result of rising temperatures. So I also want to talk about the energy system. And so what you're seeing on the left here is a graph from Shanghai, but any city that has substantial air conditioning penetration looks very similar to this. And what you're basically seeing is around, in this case, 23 degrees Celsius. Now that threshold will shift depending on the city, but generally in that range of about 19 degrees Celsius up to about 23 degrees Celsius, you've got a fairly flat use of electricity in the average city. Sometimes you do have a little bit of a bump towards the lower end if the city is a cooler climate. But right around that 23 degree threshold, we start to see rapid increase in air conditioning use and therefore energy demand, electricity demand. And I can tell you in my city in Washington, D.C., when we have a 23 degree day versus a 30 degree day, we're actually using almost 30% more power in that 10 degree band. And that's a substantial difference, which taxes the grid. And it also, in some cases, requires us to draw power from our most polluting power plants in the system in order to meet that demand. So it can further compound the air quality challenge that we just talked about. And as you can see here, as excess urban heat gets more intense in the coming decades, the electricity demand in cities will grow and affect electricity costs and system efficiency. And going back to that IEA report, The Future of Cooling, by 2050, we find that up to 40% of peak load in places like Indonesia, as you can see circled in red here, will actually be from cooling. So this will be a major piece of the electrical infrastructure challenge that Indonesia and others in South Asia, including India, will face going forward. And I call this heat is a risk to transportation, but I think it's a broader point here. I think we often hear, and I've certainly said it myself, that heat is the silent killer. And we talk about it as comparing it to, say, a typhoon or a tornado or other natural disaster that causes more visible physical damage to our infrastructure. And that is true, but it does ignore the fact that heat is itself a risk to our physical infrastructure. You can see here some photos from around the world. The photo on the left is from the United States. It's from New Jersey, just south of New York City. Melting roadways in New Delhi in 2015. We've certainly seen more of that since then. In the city of Phoenix in the U.S. Southwest, a heat wave that hit there a few years ago was so intense that the air made it impossible to land some of our larger airplanes at the Phoenix International Airport. So it had a major business and tourist impact. And then in Australia, the melting of roads there as well. So these impacts of heat aren't just felt in the human body and in sort of invisible ways, but they also manifest themselves physically as well. And throughout this, the items I've highlighted here and the broader spectrum of economic and health and other implications, I want to be clear that this is an asymmetric impact. It's not happening to everyone equally. It is primarily affecting those that are most vulnerable, those that are least have the least resources and capacity to adapt to these higher temperatures. And so this is also driving, among other factors, is driving global inequities, because the impacts that are being faced most by the people who have the least capacity to absorb them. So as we're making changes in our built environment to address this, we're also indirectly and directly shrinking that inequity gap that we have in every country around the world. So I now want to turn to the good news, I guess, the good news portion of what I wanted to say today, and talk a little bit about the cooling strategies that are currently available to us. And before I jump into that, I want to make the point that many of these strategies are based in ancient practices. They have modern application and they have modern technology that supports them. But many of these are part of the way we used to build our communities and build our cities, and adapted for the modern age. And so we're in some ways coming back to a building style that served our ancestors well. And I also want to point out that I'm going to be talking mostly about those sort of higher tech solutions here, but that within each of these categories, there are often local solutions that can be adopted that serve the same purpose. So as an example, when we were talking about a cool roof or lightening the color of a roof, we're often talking about certain coatings and certain high quality paints or other types of applications to the roof. But you could also include a lime wash that you replace every year, or in India, for example, the use of cracked porcelain to help reflect the sun's energy. So while I may be covering more general technologies in this space, in many cases there are vernacular and traditional options that are available that are often less expensive and that are important and applicable here. So before we jump into that, I want to sort of frame this around the seminal work that was done by Professor Oki about 50 years ago to help put an equation around the urban heat characteristics and what we can do about it. So what you're seeing here is a modification of his an original equation for how we evaluate this. So on the left side here, highlighted in the box, you see these are energy inputs into the air. And so in a city, heat energy is generated by solar radiation with sunlight that's being absorbed by surfaces, and also by waste heat emissions from our cars and buses and trucks, from our air conditioning units, that sort of thing. So these are sort of the inputs into urban heat on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, we see where that heat energy goes. And so that heat energy may be stored in the buildings, as we talked about, so in the pavement material. So this would be where the sun's energy hits the building. It is absorbed as heat and then is radiated off of those surfaces into our communities. It can be blown away by the wind out of the urban area, or it can be used to evaporate moisture into water vapor. So instead of turning into heat, it's actually being used to make a transition from water to water vapor, or otherwise known as latent cooling. So within these two pieces of the equation, we really see how these different technologies that I'm going to talk about, or these measures that I'm going to talk about, how they actually work. Which of these pieces are they manipulating to improve cooling in the urban space? And so again, I want to highlight a few of the measures that we have out here, and I'm going to break them into two major buckets. The first is, excuse me, here we go, what I'll call passive or non-mechanical cooling solutions. Just the other day, I heard someone describe this a little differently, by the way, and I actually like the way they described it. So I'll also say one other way to think about this is, what could we do outside of our building to improve the inside of the building and the urban air temperature? And then we also have the active cooling, which is what we can do on the inside of the building to improve its thermal comfort. And so in the context of the first section, the passive, or let's say outside cooling solutions, we've got a number at our fingertips here. First is increasing the ability of our urban roofs, walls, and pavements to reflect rather than absorb solar radiation. That's what we're calling reflective surfaces. We can increase the amount of vegetated cover and tree canopy, which is the shading and permeable surfaces there in the middle box. We can increase the number of and accessibility to natural and man-made water features, either through fountains or by revitalizing or utilizing existing natural waterways, which is listed here as water infrastructure. And then finally, in the passive side, thinking about our urban design. So designing our urban spaces so that they minimize heat buildup and heat retention, and maximizing wind flows through our cities, and calling that here urban design. Another piece of this that I included in passive design is related to energy efficiency, and this gets to some of the challenges that we see with increased electrical use, and helping to minimize that need to turn on that air conditioner that would then drive waste heat, drive additional greenhouse gas emissions. And so here it's looking at other building designs, so things related to, for example, different levels of insulation that are appropriate in particular areas. External window shades that help reduce the amount of sunlight moving into a building, and therefore reducing the interior thermal load. These sorts of solutions aren't directly, they're improving the efficiency of the building and the thermal comfort of the building. And so they're important as part of the solution set as well. And then finally, with the active cooling piece, we can be doing more work here to reduce waste heat by improving the efficiency of our air conditioning. And we've certainly seen movements in the active space to move towards newer technologies that either recapture waste heat or that minimize the amount of waste heat that are generated up front and improve the efficiency of air conditioning units. And then solutions for reducing waste heat in our vehicular stock. So whether that be moving towards electrifying our vehicles and our fleets, or reducing the idling and the amount of time they're sitting stationary, generating heat from an internal combustion engine. Those sorts of strategies and solutions are also a part of the sort of cooling options that we have available to us. So I won't go through each one of these here, but just to say this is drawn from the primer on for cool cities that was mentioned earlier on. There's a couple points I want to make here, though, at the general level. And the first is that these solution sets are common across the world, that this is sort of the menu of solutions that we're going to be building our local cooling strategies around. That said, each of these is going to be more applicable in certain areas than others. And so the mix of these solutions will differ by location, in some cases even within a city. So I think we understand at a broad scale what the opportunities for cooling are, what the solutions for cooling are, but then there is still a need to understand what is the right mix of those solutions to apply in our communities. And I'll talk a little bit about those considerations as we go. But one thing I do want to point out is that no matter where we are in humid tropical areas, in dry desert areas, in a four-season climate where you have a cold winter and a warm or hot summer, these solution sets apply. They all have different performance levels, but they will generate cooling benefits in each of those different varied climates. So now I'm going to just take a little bit of a deeper dive into each of these opportunities and how they work. So I'm going to start with this idea of solar reflectivity. And so the concept of creating cooler structures using the surface's ability to reflect sunlight and to efficiently emit the absorbed heat was applied on buildings going back thousands of years. I mean, there's examples of this in ancient Sumerian architecture, ancient Egyptian architecture. Certainly, if you've seen any photos of the Greek islands and the buildings built there, you'll see it there too. So this is one of those ideas that is not new in terms of it as a concept. And this is how it works essentially. So every opaque urban surface, the roof, the wall, pavements, they reflect some incoming sunlight, and you can see that here, this little bar. So in a dark roof, the portion of the amount of sunlight that's reflected is relatively small. and when it is reflected, it's reflected out into the sky and ideally through the atmosphere and into space. And so this is essentially reducing the amount of sun's energy that's absorbed as heat, or absorbed and turned into heat, if you will. And on a dark roof, we can see that actually two other things will happen relatively more frequently here. The first is that solar energy will be absorbed on the surface of the roof and then be re-emitted as heat that will warm the building, warm the area around the building, and warm the atmosphere above the building. And there's a wide variety of interactions that occur here, but essentially those are the two pieces that will happen into the ambient outside air from the result of it being the solar energy being absorbed. The other piece that will occur is that some of that solar energy that's converted into heat will be emitted into the building and will warm the interior of the building. And the amount of that warming will depend on the amount of insulation in the surface, but it can be a substantial amount. And so the idea behind increasing reflectivity is to get to the graph on the right-hand side, which is to say the same set of interactions: reflectivity, absorbing and re-emitting into the air, absorbing and emitting into the building, but we're increasing the percentage or increasing the relative amount of that solar energy that's being reflected out into space rather than affecting the local area. And this can have substantial benefits that we'll talk about in later slides here. In fact, we'll talk about it in this slide. So what you're seeing here is a school in Northern Cape Province in South Africa in a community called Kais. And so I want to talk a little bit about just in general what we see as the benefits, and they really span from the building scale all the way up to the global scale. So the first is reflective surfaces are applicable on nearly every type of roof, whether it be steep or flat. There is some alternative roof that can be made cool or made reflective, with the exception, I believe, of thatched roofs, which are already cool, at least for the inside roof. But for just about every other type of roof, whether it be metal, asphalt, tile, there are options that can make that roof cool. When we have active cooling, in all but the coldest climates, solar reflective roofs can reduce the net cooling energy demand by between 20 and 40%, and potentially more if they're paired with cool walls. And you can actually see at the very bottom of this picture that this structure has, at least in some cases, light colored walls as well. So in warm US climates, we found that cool walls lowered annual heating and cooling energy costs by about 8.5%, which is about a little over $1 per square meter in single family homes, and just about $2 per square meter, or 4.2%, in medium sized offices. So these can be substantial benefits in terms of energy savings, and these apply even into colder climates in the US and elsewhere. So in terms of the cost effectiveness, and the primer actually has some updated numbers from around the world in terms of cost, and I think Professor Paramita could probably speak to this with great accuracy for Indonesia. But what we find is generally for almost all of the cool roof options, the upfront cost premiums while they'll vary, are fairly low. Although I will say in new markets, these cost premiums are still a challenge. But as we see more and more adoption of cool roof policy and others, we've seen steadily that costs can come down to being neutral with existing solutions, or in some cases actually cheaper or less expensive than existing options. In general, what we see in a developed market for cool roofs, Australia, Europe, North America, is that the payback for applying a cool roof is anywhere between 0 to 6 years in terms of just based on the energy savings alone, not even looking at the other broader societal benefits, or even in some cases valuing the peak demand benefits in the electricity. So this is really just looking at demand reduction overall. And I alluded to global cooling. And so I want to explain that briefly here. So there's been a large-scale shift. So if a large-scale shift towards reflective surfaces could immediately cool the world by reducing the amount of heat that is transmitted from the Earth's surface and trapped in the atmosphere. So basically taking the method by which reflective surfaces cool and translating that into the amount of warming that is generated by atmospheric greenhouse gases. So if we say, if we were considering changing a dark surface to a light surface, that cooling effect can be thought of as equivalent to a warming effect from greenhouse gases that have already been emitted. So to take the analogy of a tub that's filling with water, or in this case, greenhouse gases, these solutions don't just turn down the tap on the amount of greenhouse gases going into the tub, but they also reduce or offset the warming effect or the negative effects of the GHGs that have already been emitted. And on a global scale, if we were to do cool roofs and cool pavements on all the places where it made sense to do it, we'd be talking about the canceling the warming effect of between 44 and 57 billion metric tons of emitted carbon dioxide. So that's essentially that's like taking half the world's cars off the road for 20 years. And finally, reduced indoor and outdoor air temperatures. I want to make sure I get both of those on there. We talked a little bit about that in terms of the numbers around this. An average outdoor air temperatures, in studies that we've seen, for every 0.1 increase of 10% percentage point increase in reflectivity, we can reduce outdoor air temperatures by about 0.3 degrees Celsius. To give you a sense of what a 10 percentage point increase in reflectivity looks like, that would be a change from a dark gray to a slightly lighter gray. This is not going from black to white. So when we look at this overall, in the cities where this has been studied, a reasonable deployment of cooled surfaces in a city. So by that I mean not the technical potential for this, but what can be done realistically, could reduce urban average temperatures by about 1 degree Celsius. That may not sound like much, but that is a substantial amount of cooling when you consider that against the warming that has occurred on the global average basis. And we're a little over 1 degree Celsius now. So reducing our urban temperatures by 1 degree Celsius on average, essentially, and again, this is rough terms, essentially negates the effect of warming that we've felt over the last 100 years since the Industrial Revolution began. So it is very substantial. And then the other piece of this that's important here, this 1 degree, and why it's an important number, is that when we think about the effects on the energy system, the effects on the health system, and the effects on air quality, as you saw, they weren't linear. You know, they get to a particular threshold, and then every degree change over that threshold temperature is a substantial increase. So once we're over that threshold temperature, these types of reductions have an outsized benefit in the communities where they've been applied. And on the inside buildings, we see this as well. So, and again, I would point to Professor Paramita and her work in Indonesia and demonstrating this in Indonesia and some of the substantial cooling benefits that they've seen inside structures. I can tell you on average what we've seen in pilots and other places that we've worked, for example, in India, about a 2.5 to 3.5 degrees Celsius reduction in indoor temperatures. And this is a life-saving difference, not just in terms of mortality and health, but also just in terms of quality of life. In some cases, we've had people tell us that, you know, the upstairs room or the loft room that was never usable at night as a sleeping space is now available as a sleeping space because it's so much cooler. So there are huge quality of life benefits to these temperature reductions as well. Now, of course, as I mentioned a couple slides ago, you know, there are always use case considerations to think about here. And so that's certainly true for solar reflective surfaces. The first is, especially in cooler climates or four-season climates, you can have some additional heating demand that's generated as a result of applying cool surfaces. So you're cooling in the summer, but you're also cooling a little bit in the winter. This generally up into the very northern Arctic parts of the world is still a net cooling benefit from solar reflective surfaces, that you get more of the benefit from reduced summertime temperatures than you have penalty in the winter. So this is generally an overstated challenge, but is one to consider depending on where you're applying these. The other aspect here is the reflectivity of a surface changes over time. So the surface gets dirty. There's biological growth that can occur. Dust from sandstorms, things like that, can reduce the reflectivity the initial reflectivity. So what we see in international codes that have mandates for reflectivity in some cases, they actually specify an aged value rather than an initial value to capture this. What we generally see in the U.S., where we're looking at biological growth, we're looking at industrial emissions and their effect on the roof, and we're looking at desert conditions, that we see about a 25% reduction over about 3 years. And then it stabilizes after that. So as a rule of thumb, you could consider about 25% reduction. If the roof isn't regularly washed, or more likely, which actually we see more frequently, is if you have rains that come through on some basis, that will generally clean the roofs as well. So you may not lose as much if you've got an area with regular precipitation. If the goal of this is energy savings, then the level of insulation in the roof and wall will matter. So the amount of thermal transference from the outside to the inside will be affected by the insulation as well. So that's a factor as we're thinking about our building systems. In very tight quarters, there may be a need to understand the impact of solar radiation on other buildings and pedestrians. I will say that this is generally because the radiation is not concentrated solar reflection. So it's not like you're shining a mirror off of a building. It's more diffuse in nature. But this tends not to be an issue unless it's the building has full exposure to sunlight, and people have to be very close to it, or it's very close to other buildings where it's reflecting in, and there you might have some small impact. But this is certainly something to consider depending on the urban space that you're working with. And then finally, something we're overcoming now, but has been a challenge over the years, is aesthetics. Many of us did not grow up with white roofs or white walls. Those of us that did or have been enjoying the benefit of this for a long time. But there is a certain amount of acclimation that needs to happen for people to see light-colored surfaces as just as beneficial and valuable as a dark surface or a new-looking roof. So there is this aspect to it as well. I will say that on the higher end, there are opportunities to apply highly reflective surfaces that also have colors. So they appear to be a particular color, green or blue, in the visible part of the spectrum, but they're reflecting more in the near infrared spectrum, the invisible part of the solar spectrum. So you're getting a red color that looks just like a regular red pigment, but is actually maybe 3 to 4 times as reflective as that red pigment. So there are other ways to get around this aesthetic issue as well, beyond just acclimatizing to it. So the second major category is what I will call cooling, using permeable surfaces to cool via evaporation. And so we're going to cover here things like green roofs, green walls, which are sort of a hybrid man-made nature-based solution, and then permeable pavements, which are often applied for their stormwater retention and management benefits, but under certain conditions can create the same type of evaporative cooling as these other measures. And in a future slide, I'm going to cover the impact of trees, which also apply here, but have an additional benefit of shading. So I'll get to that in a slide in a second here. But permeable surfaces cool by allowing water to pass through its surface, and then it can be stored there and then later evaporated by the sun's energy. This is that generation of latent energy, essentially, that we talked about in the calculation slide. And this includes, as I mentioned, both vegetated surfaces, but also the sort of pavement technologies that are permeable. Green roof, as many of you know, is a vegetated layer that's grown on the rooftop. These can be extensive or intensive, thicker or thinner, can hold bigger or smaller plants. They can be appropriate for urban agriculture in some cases, or in other cases, it can be a tray system that is quite light and even portable in some cases to accomplish what it's trying to do. In addition to cooling, and we'll get to this in a minute, there are a wide variety of other benefits that are generated by these nature-based solutions that make them very attractive beyond just their cooling benefits. And we're increasingly seeing in cities, especially in cities where there's lots of new development, and in iconic or high, let's say the sort of higher end commercial structures, the use of living walls or bio walls. And this is sort of a vertical system that grows up the side of the wall and can provide shade in addition to evaporative cooling as well. So we'll get to this in the consideration section, but there's obviously a number of things to think about as you're planning out a green roof or a green wall. And we'll get into that in a few minutes. But plant selection in this context is I think particularly important, especially given the fact that we're living in a changing climate, and the plants that are appropriate today may not be appropriate in 20 years due to climate change and due to the conditions that we'll be facing in our urban spaces. So I've talked a little bit about this already, so I won't belabor this point to any great degree, but the green space, green roofs and walls and trees and permeable pavements use a process called evapotranspiration or evaporation. So you can see this blue circle is indicating that there's moisture in those spaces already versus say an asphalt pavement. And then, so evapotranspiration in this context works by solar radiation hitting that surface or impacting that surface, and it converts the stored moisture into water vapor, which is that light blue arrow there. That would have otherwise heated that surface and then been re-emitted into the local area. So this lowers air temperatures and it increases the moisture content of the air. So we're lowering temperatures and we're seeing an increase in humidity as well. Now, obviously, increasing urban tree canopy is a common solution. It's certainly the most popular solution that we see cities looking to adopt in terms of replacing lost tree canopy, both in terms of street trees and in terms of on private space. We can get into some of the benefits here in a second, but this is certainly, I'd say, of all of the solutions we're talking about, the one that we're seeing cities most focus on in building out their solution sets for urban cooling. And again, this is not just building new parks or huge park areas, although we do see some of that. It's being creative about using small spaces for parks. So as an example here, Seoul, South Korea created 1,000 new parks over the course of a few years, simply by looking at small urban spaces that can be turned into small stands of trees and other types of vegetation to generate local cooling benefits. Rather than having an entire huge park area, they created these many different park areas, which also had the benefit of spreading out the benefits of those trees to a wider set of the population. And so there are a wide variety of sort of creative and interesting ways that this is being done globally. So the benefits of natural solutions, and here I'm going to cover both trees and sort of vegetated surfaces together. So they generate, like I said, a huge variety of benefits that go beyond cooling. But let's start with energy savings and reduced indoor air temperatures. We found that in studies that insulation and the shading that are generated by green roofs and walls reduce cooling demand in buildings by up to 40%, between 15 and 40%, and help reduce indoor air temperatures. They also, like I said, with the insulated value, you're getting sort of two benefits in one with a green roof and a green wall. In terms of outdoor air temperatures, green roof surfaces temperatures can be reduced by 17 to 22 degrees Celsius than what you see on a conventional dark surface. So it's a substantial surface cooling benefit. And they can reduce air temperatures by between 0.3 degrees and 3 degrees Celsius when deployed at scale. So this is a potentially very potent urban cooling solution set. When we look at comparisons of temperature within more dense urban forests and non-green urban sites, we've also shown lower temperatures in the forested sites that can be up to 10 degrees Celsius. So urban parks not only are helping generate more average cooling, but they can be areas of respite on our hottest and most dangerous days. They can be accessible to a wide variety of people if they're placed in strategic locations. A row or a concentration of trees can reduce average daytime temperatures of between 0.5 degree and 2 degrees Celsius. So even a smaller deployment can have substantial benefits. And these benefits aren't just right underneath the tree or right next to the green space. What we find in studies is that these extend beyond their borders. And the bigger the green space, the further it extends. So a study measuring temperatures at increasing distance from 2 large parks in Singapore, and the cooling impacts were generated up to 500 meters from the park boundary. So these are, potentially huge opportunities to reduce outdoor air temperature. As I mentioned, the ability to store rainwater is valued in some cases more than their cooling benefits in cities that are dealing with freshwater flooding. And so this is another reason we see these solutions develop. One thing we advocated for at Global Cool Cities Alliance was not just thinking about where green spaces can be beneficial for stormwater mitigation, but also looking at where that flooding challenge intersects with high heat areas and really focusing deployments there to get the sort of multi-hazard benefits of the solution. There's obviously aesthetic value, as you can see in the picture. Many of us find green spaces to be very calming and relaxing and wanting to be there, and they can be iconic spaces in our cities. Think the Central Park in New York, for example. And we've seen in studies from Australia and elsewhere that increase in green space also has a commensurate increase in property values in the areas around those installations. Opportunities to increase biodiversity or to enhance biodiversity are certainly a part of what we see, not just in terms of allowing more species to grow, but we're also seeing cities being very thoughtful about creating natural lanes, both through ground-based park space, but also on living walls and in green roofs that allow fauna in particular to move through the urban space in a less obstructed way. So that I'm going to cover in a separate, but I covered it here, but I call that enhanced biodiversity, not just increased biodiversity. Trees, obviously, and green space capture greenhouse gas emissions. And excuse me, here we go. We actually see that when paired with solar photovoltaics, there's some studies from the U.S., the University of Kansas in particular, found that the cooling effect of the green roof actually helped improve the electrical efficiency of solar panels, not by a huge degree, but by a few percentage points. And so thinking about these as integrated solutions can be valuable, especially in an environment where we're trying to build more renewable energy in our cities. I talked about the enhanced biodiversity already, and just generally the improvement to human lives. I think we're talking a lot about the sort of scientific and technical benefits, but as we think about beautifying our spaces, creating spaces that we want to be in, that we want to move through, there's a spiritual value to that, and there's a mental health benefit to that. And I would point to, as an example of this, the work that's been done in Medellin, Colombia, where the city has invested in not just enhancing green space that has been, or bringing back green space that has been lost or that has not been managed, but using that as an opportunity to physically connect communities that have been separated by gray infrastructure development. And what that has led to is greater interaction between communities. It's created greater civic engagement between these communities. It's created opportunities for urban agriculture and bringing people together in a way that didn't exist prior to that. So it's harder to create an economic valuation on that, but there are certainly huge human life benefits and quality of life benefits that can accrue from these solutions. And again, here considerations to think about as you're considering green infrastructure. In particular, here I'm talking about green roofs and walls. Certainly, the building you're putting it on matters. The structure has to be sufficient to support it, to support the design that you're planning. In environments where it's very dry or very arid, or where precipitation is infrequent, water usage is going to be a critical piece of this. What we see, for example, in Phoenix, the investment in green space and green roofs is far less than what we see in, say, New York City and Washington, D.C., which have more rainfall to feed that. And this is particularly important in the first 3 to 5 years of the roof's life. So there may need to even irrigate, physically get up on the roof and irrigate it in some cases, if this is the choice you're making. So that's something to consider as you're planning this. I mentioned that the evaporative cooling or evapotranspirative cooling has 2 impacts on the air. It can lower the temperature, but it also increases humidity. And so what we see is when we think about the apparent temperature, the temperature that a human actually experiences, the temperature that drives their health outcomes, is they're benefited by a reduction in the temperature, the air temperature, but some of that is given back in an increased humidity. And so while in almost no cases does the humidity increase override the benefit from increased temperature, it's something to consider when you're evaluating the different measures you're looking at. And certainly, especially when it comes to green roofs and green walls, these are more expensive solutions. They provide a tremendous number of benefits that pay back over time. And we've seen study after study that shows that if we value the benefits of these investments properly, they're highly beneficial from an economic perspective. But nonetheless, there is a first cost premium to consider here that may be a challenge to overcome in certain contexts. So I'm saying natural spaces here. Again, here I'm talking about trees in particular. There's some additional benefits that I want to mention here, and that is water availability, which we talked about. In some cases, nighttime urban heat. So here, while again the net benefit of trees is clearly there in terms of as a cooling solution, very, very dense overhead obstructions at night can actually trap heat at the surface. We more often see this with the way we build our buildings, creating overhangs that provide shade during the day, but that actually extend the impact of heat in the evening. But we can actually still see some of that in extremely dense tree planting environments too. So it's something to think about when planning those types of investments. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the idea around proper plant selection. So, whether many of the challenges we're facing here are that the traditional tree varieties that we have been used to are in some cases facing new disease vectors because of climate change. The changes in precipitation or temperature are affecting the ability of certain, native species to thrive into the future. And so planning for that shift in the types of plants that will thrive is really critical to making sure you have a long-lasting tree canopy, because obviously the benefits of a tree canopy accrue only when that tree is able to make it to maturity and provide those benefits. So one great example of this happening in a city right now is in Guadalajara, Mexico. They have a program where they're working with local nurseries to essentially help the nurseries transition to trees that they can then plant. And they have an active tree planting, street tree planting program that is then adopting and buying those trees, supporting that market, and moving those trees into service, if you will, in a proactive way rather than waiting until you have a major die-off. And then the other consideration isn't a negative thing, but just to say that the place a tree is planted does matter, and especially when we're talking about a tree on someone's property. Planting that tree to provide maximum shade to the structure will enhance and optimize the energy savings benefits and thermal comfort benefits for the inside of the building. And we've talked a lot about what I would call sort of technical measures or adoptable measures, but there's also differences in how we design our urban spaces. And you can see, I can go through each of these on the left, but I think as you can see, there's a number of different ways to design our built environment. And most of these get to one key aspect, and that is, how do we make sure we are maximizing the natural wind flows through our cities and maximizing the wind flows from cooler spaces into warmer spaces? And so that can be improving the wind flow that's coming off of a body of water into an urban space. It's allowing lanes for wind to move through. It's thinking about the positioning and orientation of our buildings so that wind can more easily move through them, even if they're tall buildings. It's the design of certain buildings, so incorporating ventilation into the building design itself that can allow that wind to move through, even if the structure itself is monolithic. It's reducing that monolithic wall space. It's allowing more setbacks off the roadway so that you're not, instead of having structures that are overhanging, they're set back from the building. This allows heat to escape more readily and then also be blown away more readily. And this also similarly with sort of step building height profiles. And urban design in many cases is a ship that has sailed for many cities, particularly, large mega cities where we have a lot of development already done. But in places where we have new development on a large scale, these can be really critical in enhancing a city's ability to avoid and shed heat that they do build up. And a great example here, actually, it's occurring currently in both a historical downtown neighborhood and also a new development is in Guangzhou, China, where they're doing a number of investments to enhance not only the use of more ventilated space, but strategically placing buildings, tall buildings, in places around the community to provide shade at critical times of the day, and to increase the access of to wind that's blowing off of both natural and man-made water structures into older neighborhoods. So it doesn't just have to be greenfield developments. It can also be applied in some fashion to historic neighborhoods as well. Okay, so I'm going to shift over to the benefits of cooling strategies and why these make sense to do. I've talked a little bit about these benefits in the individual cases, and I want to sort of talk about it here in a more through a particular lens of the Sustainable Development Goals. So, as I mentioned, we can look at the benefits of heat. We've looked at the broad spectrum challenge of heat and the different aspects that it affects. Cooling those spaces, cooling our communities, cooling our buildings has an equally broad set of benefits. I think those benefits really accrue in four main SDGs. The first is SDG 3, which is good health and well-being. And this accrues from better air quality, reduced heat stress, as a major supporter for human health. SDG 10, reduced inequalities. As I mentioned earlier, the impact of heat is felt predominantly by those that are most vulnerable. And so $1 invested in reducing urban temperatures or reducing building resilience to heat is $1 invested in improving and reducing inequality. SDG 11, sustainable cities and communities. Again, we're improving the livability, the prosperity of communities by making them greener, by making them cooler. And we're also helping to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, which gets to SDG 13, the fourth main SDG that is effective here. And that's, we talked about the mitigation through energy efficiency, the benefit of reflective surfaces to cancel the warming effect of greenhouse gases that have already been emitted, can be a substantial benefit from the adoption of passive cooling and heat resilience. So while these may be where the main benefits are recognized, I think we could probably, and I won't do this now, but we could probably go through each of these and be able to draw heat and heat resilience into each of these. And so just as a quick exercise in this, let's take SDG 1, no poverty. What we're finding is investments in passive cooling create a supply chain that is inclusive of high-tech manufacturing, low-tech manufacturing, applicators that can be trained in a matter of days or even hours in some cases. And these create good jobs that allow people to move out of poverty, or certainly to provide more economic comfort. SDG 2, ending hunger. While heat isn't a direct impact here, we have seen that cooling structures, and there's a great example from India, actually, Mr. Bipin Shah, who I believe is on this call as well and has worked with the Coolroof's Indonesia team, is piloting some work on some cooling infrastructure on cattle sheds. And what they found is that the cattle, when they're cooler, generate more milk, and they generate enough additional milk that it paid for the interventions in a matter of 9 months. So we can substantially increase the efficiency of our growing and our sort of food systems with investments in cooling. So I won't continue this. I don't want to take up too much of your time with this, but it's an exercise that you can go through here and really find that reducing heat and increasing heat resilience can be one of the top reasons, can generate benefits in almost every one of these SDGs. There's also an economic case here to be made. So of course, we're distilling all of these various benefits that accrue to society into an overall economic benefit. And what we see here is, this is actually from that study I quoted earlier, where we looked at, a 5.6% cost to not inaction. They also looked at the benefits of action, and you can.
I need to interrupt your presentation. Sorry, you have 3 minutes left because we want to have more discussion with the audience.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm actually okay. Great. I will just say that. Thank you for that. So the benefits that we're seeing from these accrue at a rate of about 12 to 1. So $1 invested in passive cooling can generate up 12 or more dollars in economic benefits. I've talked a little bit about as we've been going through this, I've talked about some examples from around the world. So I will skip over those and just focus on a couple overarching things that we're doing at the center that may be of interest to you. And the first is, one of the main challenges we see is the lack of unified governance around heat. Heat's interspersed throughout a city because its challenges and benefits are interspersed. And so we're working to create chief heat officers that can coordinate action on heat within city governments. And the first 3 have been appointed this year in Miami-Dade County, in Freetown in Sierra Leone, and in Athens, Greece. And these are real opportunities to drive big projects that have benefits. And each of these will look a little different in how they operate. But ultimately, it will be focused politically and also from an implementation perspective. And then also raising awareness of heat as an issue by instituting a heat season, just like we have a typhoon season or a hurricane season. And so Seville, Spain, and Los Angeles and Miami and Athens will also be adopting an official heat season. And I mentioned earlier the Million Cool Roofs Challenge. So I won't spend much time on this here, but just to say that program has just wrapped up over 18 months, including the entire period of the pandemic. That program to build champions in supply chains, including in Indonesia, generated 1.1 million million square meters of new cool roofs. That is the equivalent of 10 years of cool roof activity in New York City, which is one of the premier cities that we've seen focus on this for the longest time. So it shows that focused action and developing local champions can have a scaled impact now and into the future, even under the most challenging of conditions. And by the way, in most of these countries, cool roofs and cool products were not even available in the marketplace when we started this. So we went from literally zero to, and I say we, it's these teams, literally zero to pretty substantial deployment. And I will end on a note of congratulations to you, Professor Paramita, for your work with Cool Roofs Indonesia. I won't go through all of these, but just to say the work that Indonesia has done in this space has been incredible, and you can see the benefits that have accrued across many of the different categories I've talked about here today. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for your time and your patience.
Okay, thank you, Kurt, for your very nice presentation, insightful and very informative. It's very new for us about the cooling system, also about the passive cooling in your presentation. Now we are moving in the question and answer segment. There are a couple questions in Slido. Before I read the question, I would like to remind again to the participant who want to ask the question, you may reach to the application of the Slido with the hashtag #TopWebinar2. So I want to read. I'm gonna read one question. It's from. Wait a minute. It's from ITS Novianto. He asked about unlike in tropical during the winter, white roof may increase heating demand, leads to more emissions and warming. What do you think?
It's a great question. And so there are several reasons why, while that is a factor in cooler climates, it is almost never the case that the amount of penalty we get from increased heating demand overtakes the benefit we get from cooling demand. And there are, if I could expand on that just for a second, first is, if we think about the solar angle that the sun is impacting our cities during the winter versus summer, the angle is much more direct in the summer. And so the reflective benefit is greater in the summertime than it is in the winter, where the sun is at a lower angle. There are also factors related to the occupancy of the buildings. Now, that's obviously been a little strange during COVID, but generally we see that the heating portion of the day is also when the sun is almost down, and so the impact of reflectivity is lower. The other aspect of this is the interplay between insulation and surface is really important here. And so, especially in a northern climate where higher levels of insulation may be more appropriate, what we've found, and there's some great work out of the Princeton Plasma Physics Lab that shows that by increasing the insulation of the roof surface, of the roof structure with a cool roof, you're getting both the cooling benefit of the cool roof in the summer, but you're getting the benefit of the insulation in the winter. That these are symbiotic relationships. So there's a number of reasons why, while the winter heating penalty does exist, it's typically more minor. It's not a one-to-one trade-off, at least in our experience, and that's up through northern Canada and even into parts of Alaska. So very cold climates. This is still the case that we get a net energy benefit even in those climates in some cases.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so
Yeah,
actually, that's also in our perception in Indonesia. In Indonesia, we don't have any winter. So when people going to implement the cool roof, there will be no problem in the winter. Yeah, because we don't have winter. So we move to another question from Phu Thi Pong To. I guess it's Vietnamese. What do you think about the environment will be less polluted during the COVID-19 pandemic?
It's a good question. I'm not an expert here. As I understand it, we did see some small reduction in greenhouse gas emissions during the COVID-19 pandemic, but we've already seen that we've returned to levels pre-pandemic and exceeded those already. So it seems to me that the small blip we got from a global economic shutdown has perhaps passed, but I'm not an expert on this particular aspect of it.
Yeah. So we move to another question from Doni Iskandar. In the context of urban center, which the building are high rises, how effectiveness of the reflective roof to reduce the temperature compared to the green roof? So he wants to compare between the cool roof and the green roof.
Yeah. So I'd say in general, in a high-rise context, the roof is less important than the walls. So both the reflective roof and the green roof are going to have less of an impact on the cooling in a tall, narrow structure than it would on a wide, low structure. The other aspect of this is that, at least in terms of cooling, the reflective roof is the primary benefit will be in the space below the roof, the floor below the roof. So in a very tall building with many floors, the cooling benefit from just the roof will be fairly minimal for the most part. Now that said, so I guess to answer that question more effectively, I'd say that because green roofs provide a broader set of system benefits, they may be preferable in that context if the roof can support it structurally and economically. But I also would say that, going back to the reflective roof piece, the cooling benefit at the local scale may be limited, but it doesn't matter where that, when you change a surface from dark to light, that global cooling benefit is the same. It can be from, changing the color of a street, changing the color of a roof, changing the color of crops in some cases. You're going to get that global cooling benefit. And so there are still benefits that accrue, even if they're limited because of the building type, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I would like to add some comment with the green roof in Indonesia, particularly because we are in the tropical region. We have humidity very high, so we have to be very careful to put every green things in our roof. It's quite difficult to maintain. So I guess the cool roof will be much more better. It's not the commercial things, but this is much more better for the cool roof. Okay, next question from another Doni. An emerging economic country will contribute to the mechanical cooling. Yeah, Indonesia is known like emerging country now, economic country. The passive cooling then seems too cliche for most people who afford for cooling tool. So what do you think about that? Because people can afford the cooling system.
Yeah, so this is a great point. And so I think there's very little we're going to be able to do to convince someone that can afford an air conditioner not to buy it. And I want to say you're talking about this in the broader sort of emerging economic countries versus the, developed economic countries. But this applies also within a city too. We do need to see developed countries that have contributed to the problem of heat, contribute to its solution through better energy efficiency and so on. So reducing their greenhouse gas loads to account for the fact that people want to be thermally comfortable, they want to be thermally safe, and they're going to invest in the solutions that they can invest in. Now, all that said, while we, with mechanical cooling, are improving the indoor temperatures, they do have a negative effect on outdoor temperatures because of waste heat. And so I don't see these as necessarily either or. I think the reality is we're going to have markets around the world that are buying active cooling, and frankly, because of the rising temperatures we're seeing, it's not fair to discourage that in any meaningful way. We're seeing cities start to talk about air conditioning as a medical device in the U.S., for example. So I actually see these as complementary solutions, because as we put in more mechanical cooling, we're increasing the air temperature in our cities, and that's going to disproportionately affect people that don't have that mechanical cooling. And so passive cooling isn't necessarily a panacea for that, but investing in that passive cooling will certainly make those spaces more survivable as the sort of as we see these trends in active cooling develop. So I don't think we can think of them as either or. They're both and more importantly, I would say, at least from my perspective, every economy should be investing in passive cooling first, build the most thermally comfortable buildings and communities as they're adopting mechanical cooling. So I think they really go hand in hand together.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So that's also our obligatory for academic to make the people raising their awareness for passive cooling. So this is followed by another question. Energy saving seems the business for government. It looks like not for the people who want to think about the energy saving. So how we as an academia or citizen can promote the awareness for the rising temperature and energy demand? Yeah, it looks like people not to think about the temperature rising. Yeah, because in Indonesia, like in Bandung as well, we don't feel any differentiate between hot or cold weather. So what do you think about how to raising the awareness of the people? Thank you.
Well, it's a great question. So I think maybe there's two ways to address that. First of all, the energy saving as the business of government. I guess I could see that in the context of policy making around energy efficiency and things like that. But those policies have to be informed by science. They have to be informed by the actual conditions on the ground. And so academia has an important role in helping to illuminate that for policymakers. And I think I don't want to put you on the spot, Vita, but I mean, I think your work specifically with Kurus Indonesia is a great example of building the technical and scientific understanding of a new technology and its potential benefits that will then hopefully inform policy. And that we can't have one without the other, or we can't have one be effective without the other. Now, the second half of that question, how do we raise awareness of this? I think there's a couple things here. One is every community comes to heat from a different challenge. In some communities I've worked in, they care about childhood health impacts. In others, it relates to other specific challenges. And because heat is so broad spectrum, we do have to consider what are the concerns of the city, what are the concerns of the communities within that city, and how do we craft a message around heat resilience that speaks to those challenges in a scientifically based way. And so that's, I think, a big piece of this. And then the other piece of it is we look at cities like Ahmedabad in India that have, and in Guadalajara I mentioned, there are public relations campaigns, billboards, news on stories on the news, things like that help people see the benefits of this beyond just the energy savings, which I think is an important piece of this. So, we've certainly seen substantial increases in awareness in cities that have invested in these types of public awareness campaigns. And I think we're living still, even though for a person like me that's worked on this for a little while, and for people like you that are in academia, this may be something that is, part of our daily life. For many people, it is not. And so there really is still a need for cities to do public awareness campaigns that meet people where they are.
Yeah, thank you. So we have still another 2 questions more. I don't know, this is about asking about your opinion. The electricity bill in Indonesia considered low, compare with people have to install the passive cooling system, which is more expensive, like solar panel or perhaps buy the cool roof paint, something like that. So what do you think about this?
Well, I mean, I think this is a challenge that whenever you're dealing with any energy efficiency measure, if the cost of electricity is low, either naturally or artificially because of policy, it does make those investments harder to make. I would go back to actually what I said at the very beginning, and which is that many of these passive cooling measures grow out of traditional cooling measures that have been adopted, that in many cases are very inexpensive and that generate benefits that go beyond just the cooling of the building. And so this is not across the board. You're certainly raising a major barrier in certain markets to adopting any pro-efficiency or pro-cooling change. But I think in this case, there are certainly ways to structure the measures that are available and that can be adopted that will not only demonstrate that there's a benefit, but that there's a net benefit over time for these investments, both economically and from just a quality of life perspective.
Yeah, perhaps people need to more aware that the electricity bill is the most crucial things in Indonesia, that they don't want to move to the renewable energy, but somehow if government going to increase the electricity bill, there will be a lot of social war, perhaps. Yeah, it's quite difficult.
The other thing I mentioned.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Peter. One other thing I mentioned that I should have mentioned is, the electricity is great if you have it, but increasingly, certainly we have a huge population of people globally that don't have access to steady electricity, and the other piece of it is even when you do, there are natural events that can occur, heat waves that overwhelm the grid, typhoons and other natural disasters that overwhelm the grid, that then require people to have thermally comfortable housing to survive. They don't have access to their air conditioner, any electricity that it needed to run it. And so there's a certain amount of disaster resilience that passive cooling provides, even if that should be valued here, that may not accrue in the electrical bill.
Couldn't agree more. So this is the last question. I would like to share with you that all surfaces are reflective to some degree. Glare could be dangerous in some point. I'm not so sure you answered about this previously. This is from Novianto. And what do you think about this glare?
Yeah, so I think there are particular cases where that could potentially be a challenge. And one would be in an extremely dense urban environment where you've got a lower roof and a taller roof. If you put a bright white roof on the lower roof, you might have some glare going into the building that's directly next to it. So there are some considerations. The other area where this is a consideration is certain types of, if you have lots of, an older structure with lots of windows that's directly on the road, with no obstructions between it, no trees, no other, kiosks or things like that between the building and the road, and you make that road very light, you can also have some issues with glare. But generally, those are fairly narrow use case challenges that we see with this. Generally, when you make a surface reflective by lightening its color, the glare, the reflection is diffuse in nature. It's not a focus mirror type glare challenge. So it's not like when you look at a building with a window wall, and the glare that might be created there, it's not the same as that. So we don't see this as a major challenge in most use cases. But certainly, you make a point that's important in a very dense urban environment with multiple different heights of buildings. That's something that needs to be considered. And by the way, that can be met by just reducing the reflectivity of the roof a little bit. You don't have to go from a dark roof to a super white roof. We can meet in the middle, and if we do that at scale, we actually get substantial benefits from lightening that without having some of that be a challenge. So these aren't reasons to not consider or do these types of measures. They're considerations for specific applications that need to be kept in mind.
Yeah, I guess you are right about for the high dense population, like in Indonesia, high dense settlement will be very difficult to achieve very wide, super wide cool roof. So I want to ask another question. It's quite intriguing question for the energy efficient based on your experience. Which one is more beneficial or perhaps more economic between solar panel and cool roof?
Yeah, so I don't see these as either or decisions because the panel can provide shade to the roof surface, but they typically don't cover the entire roof surface. So pairing a white roof or a green roof with solar panels is something that can provide the benefits of both. And in fact, as I mentioned with green roofs and to a lesser extent with cool roofs, they can actually be mutually beneficial in that the cooler roof surface and cooler conduits for the electrical equipment can actually improve the electrical efficiency of the panels themselves. So I don't see these as trade-offs as much as I see them as opportunities to pair them together to optimize their benefits. And actually, I'd say the same is true for cool roofs and green roofs, that there are benefits of pairing these two. Now, if you have you typically don't have a green roof that goes from one end of the roof to the other. So pairing the two actually provides some benefits to the roof system overall. So again, I would stress that most of these solutions I talked about today are not you choose one or the other, that they can be married together even in the same building and provide benefits.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, for residential, I guess solar panel is still quite expensive. Perhaps another method will be much better compared with the solar panel. Okay, Kurt, so we are now in the last session. We are learned a lot from Kurt Sigmund today. Thank you for sharing your experience. I know it's quite late over there. It's not just quite late, it's very late over there. But you still manage yourself to bear with us today. Really appreciate your time and effort to share your knowledge with us in this precious webinar. We do hope you can still make yourself available to come to Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia in person and extend our mutual collaboration. Once again, I would like to extend my gratitude to Professor Raffi Srinivasan from the University of Florida and Bipin Shah from WinBuild Inc. USA to join this webinar. Thank you for all audience. My sincere apology for any inconvenience during my session. And now back to Pak Ubat.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's once again give a big round of applause to both Mr. Kurt Schickman and also Ibu Beta Paramita for such wonderful presentation and discussion. Mr. Kurt Schickman, as a token of appreciation, the organizing committee is going to virtually present a certificate to you, which will be virtually presented by the Division Head of International Collaboration as well as a University Ranking, Bapak Haipan Salam, PhD. So Pak Haipan, please.
Good evening, Kurt. On behalf of Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia, I would like to thank you very much for your sharing in this webinar series. And also thank you for your insight topic about the Kuru, especially in the Kuru. Thank you very much, Kurt.
Thank you. It was an honor to join you tonight, and it's been wonderful working with Professor Paramita and UPI over the last few years. I'm looking forward to continuing that, and I will take you up on your offer to join you at UPI as soon as I'm allowed to travel to Indonesia.
See you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Pa. Also, Mr. Shekman. The second certificate is going to be virtually presented to the moderator by our beloved division head for international program di UPI, Ibu Dr. Nia Nafisa. Ibu Nia, please.
On behalf of Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia, On behalf of Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia, I would like to extend this certificate of appreciation to Ibu Dr. Beta Pramita. Thank you very much for moderating this session.
Thank you so much. Dunia.
Ladies and gentlemen, the certificate presentation to both the speaker and moderator marked the closing for today's webinar. But before that, I would like to remind you that we still have some upcoming webinars as a commemoration of UPI's 67th anniversary or Dies Natalis. The 4th International Distinguished Scholar Webinar Series will be on November 16th, 2021, and the topic of the discussion will be about heat stress and adaptation possibilities for humans in cities. Following that webinar is going to be on November 17th, 2021, and the topic of the discussion will be about dark academia, who's afraid of the neoliberal university, delivered by Professor Peter Fleming from University Technology of Sydney Business School, who is also an author of Dark Academia, How Universities Die. The next webinar is going to be on November 22nd, 2021, and the topic of the discussion will be about SDG 7, Universal Access to Modern Clean Energy, by Professor John Lovett from School of Geography, University of Leeds, UK, with the expertise of Natural Resource Management. Last but not least, on November 26th, 2021, we will have discussion on multi-representation in science education, which will be delivered by Professor David Trigast from School of Education, Curtin University, Australia. All the details and further information regarding the webinars, including the registration link of each of the webinars, can be found on DIA's Instagram account at dia.up, at dia.upi. So please follow. Also, if you want to watch the relay of today's live stream, you can access the YouTube channel of TV UP. So make sure that you hit the subscribe button to keep you updated. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of today's webinar. So I am Ubad, your master of ceremony for today's event, signing off. Once again, on behalf of the organizing committee for today's event, I would like to extend my gratitude for your enthusiastic participation and my apologies, my sincere apologies for any inconvenience. So thank you once again. Stay safe, everyone. Stay healthy. Stay happy. Looking forward to seeing you on the 4th webinar. Bye-bye. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.